Long ago, before the rivers learned to run straight and the trees could speak only in rustles, there was a strange village called Idu Ama. It was a place where the soil stayed wet all year round, not from rain but from something the villagers never dared to name. They simply called it the weeping mud. No house in Idu Ama stood on dry ground. The walls dripped slowly, the paths squelched underfoot, and every full moon the mud thickened and pulsed like it was alive. Yet the people stayed. Why? Because the mud, in all its horror, made the yam grow fat, the palm trees bear heavy fruit, and the women give birth to twins with bright, star-shaped eyes. But there was one rule. Never fall in love in the mud, never kiss, never whisper promises, and never exchange heartbeats on wet ground. To do so meant awakening something old, something forgotten, something that remembered betrayal. But young people rarely listen to old rules. Adaora was the most beautiful girl in Idu Ama. Her eyes were dark and shining like polished onyx, and her laughter, when it came, sounded like a calabash rolling over stones. She walked with her head high and her feet light, never once sinking in the mud, as though it parted for her. She was betrothed to Ekwime, a boy whose shoulders were strong and whose voice echoed with honesty. Their match was arranged by the elders, praised by the prophetess, and celebrated with 3 days of drumming and roasted goat. But Adaora's heart belonged to another. His name was Gabriel, a stranger. No one saw him enter the village. Yet one morning he was there, kneeling by the edge of the muddy stream, his face reflected in its trembling surface. He said he was looking for work. The chief gave him a machete, the women gave him stares, and Adaora gave him her heart. They met in secret beneath the fallen iroko tree, where the mud was deepest and most restless. Gabriel would hum strange songs from faraway lands, and Adaora would listen, entranced. He said her name like it was a prayer, and when he touched her hand for the first time, the mud beneath them shivered. Still, she did not stop. Love had made her deaf. On the night of the harvest moon, a wedding was to be held. Adaora and Ekwime. Goats were slaughtered, mats were spread. The flute players tuned their reed pipes. But Adaora was not in her room. She had run, barefoot through the village paths, her white wrapper dragging a trail behind her, her anklets jingling softly, past the yam barns, past the sleeping guards, until she reached Gabriel at the base of the iroko tree. And there, in the middle of the mud, they kissed. Not once, but 3 times. The mud stopped moving. Then it bubbled. Then it screamed. Not with voice, but with vibration. Every hut in Idu Ama trembled. Mortars cracked. Walls bled water. The elders woke up shouting, clutching charms and kola nuts. The sky split in half with thunder, but there was no lightning. Back beneath the iroko, Adaora clutched Gabriel, her lips wet with fear. The ground around them hissed and opened like a yawning mouth. From its depths, something began to rise. A woman-shaped figure, made entirely of mud. But her eyes, they glowed like fireflies, and her hair twisted like vines soaked in sorrow. The villagers had a name for her, though they had not spoken it in 50 years. Nam Oli, the bride of the swamp. Enma Oli was no spirit to be summoned. She was a being of pain. Once, long ago, she too had loved in the mud. She too had been betrayed. Her husband-to-be had kissed another on the day of their wedding. And so she sank into the earth, her tears turning the soil into the swamp that now fed the village. Her curse. Any two who loved falsely in the mud would pay her price. But Adaora's love was not false. It was simply forbidden. Yet, to Namaoli, rules were stone. Mercy was water. The mud rose swiftly, swirling around Gabriel's legs, pulling him downward. "No!" Adioris screamed, clutching his arms. The villagers, drawn by the scream, arrived too late. They saw the girl with her arms outstretched. They saw the mud consume Gabriel's face. They saw Namaoli turn, and they fled. Morning came, and the mud had stilled. Gabriel was gone. The Iroko tree was gone. Even the path to the place was gone, swallowed by brown silence. Adeora was found curled beside her mother's hearth, eyes wide open, silent, covered in streaks of mud. She would not speak again for 3 days. When she did, she whispered only one thing. She said he is hers now, forever. The villagers now warn their children. Never fall in love in the mud. Never whisper promises with your feet wet. And if you ever feel the ground trembling beneath your joy, run. Because Nmaoli is listening. And love in the mud always ends in sorrow. 3 moons passed since the mud took Gabriel. 3 moons since Adaora's voice returned, but her smile never did. She walked through the village like a ghost of herself, her hair no longer braided, her skirt always wet at the hem, and her eyes always watching the ground. The elders said she was cursed. The young boys said she was mad. But the old prophetess, Mama Uloma, said only one thing. She has been marked by Namaoli, and the mud does not give back what it claims, unless it is tricked. That night, Adaora crept out again. But not to the fallen Iroko. There was no path left to reach it. She went instead to the edge of the forbidden swale, a place even hunters avoided. It was said that once you stepped in, your name would vanish from memory, swallowed by the mud and silence. But Adaora had already lost everything that mattered, and in her trembling hands, she held a small clay bowl, wrapped in white cloth and tied with red string, a gift, not for Nmaoli, but for the thing that lives beneath her. There is a deeper truth to every tale, whispered only among the oldest shrines and the most silent drums. You see, Nmaoli was not the queen of the mud. She was only its heart. But the soul of the swamp, the first one to ever speak through the earth, was something far older. It was called Ogbanje Miri, the shifting one. A god, some said. A beast, others whispered. Neither man nor woman, neither good nor evil. And it traded memories for bargains. Adaora waded into the swamp, the thick silence broken only by her breath and the occasional drip of water from unseen branches. She reached the center and knelt, placing the bowl down into the wet earth. She whispered, "Take my name, take my past. Just give me back the boy from the mud." The swamp listened, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the bowl spun, the water around her rose, and something opened its eyes beneath the surface. Ogbanje Miri answered, but not with words. Adaora found herself no longer in the swamp, but in a vision. She stood in a room made of black water, its walls breathing like lungs. Before her, a shape appeared, a figure shifting between man and child, woman and beast, fire and shadow. It spoke without a mouth. To get back your love, you must give up your truth. Adaora nodded, but Ogbanje Miri laughed, the kind of laugh that echoed in your ribs and made your teeth ache. Not your truth, child, his. Suddenly, the waters parted, and Adaora saw Gabriel, but not as she remembered him. He stood tall, yes, and still had eyes like storm clouds, but his skin shimmered like it was made of wet clay. His feet didn't sink into the mud. They commanded it. He turned and looked straight at her, and said in a voice both familiar and terrifying, "Why did you come? You don't know who I am." Adaora stepped back, heart racing. "But, Gabriel, No. The creature, wearing Gabriel's face, stepped forward. You see, Gabriel had not been a stranger. He was a servant of Nema Oli, sent to tempt, sent to test, sent to feed her hunger for broken promises. He had come from the mud. That first day at the stream, he was returning, not arriving. But something had gone wrong. He had fallen truly in love with Ada Ora. And so, when she kissed him, he didn't resist the mud. He welcomed it, and in doing so, he broke Anama, Oli's ancient law. No servant of the swamp may fall in love with a mortal. He was not imprisoned, he was erased. His soul scattered beneath layers of sorrow, guilt, and earth. Only Ogbanje Miri could gather the pieces, but only at a price. Adora understood. She would not just have to give up Gabriel's past, she would have to forget him entirely. For Gabriel to live again, no one must remember the love that caused his fall, not even she who had caused it. Ogbanje Miri's condition was cruel. You may walk beside him, but your heart will no longer leap. You may hear his voice, but it will not stir your soul. He will return, but as a stranger once again. And Ada Ora agreed. She closed her eyes. The waters swallowed her. The memories began to peel away, slowly, like skin from roasted yam. Her first glance at him, their secret songs, the kiss beneath the Iroko. All of it, gone. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her hut. Her mother was calling her to fetch water. The mud felt normal underfoot. And at the edge of the village, standing quietly beside the yam barn, was a young man with kind eyes and no name. They introduced themselves like strangers. And Adaora smiled, just a small, puzzled smile, as if something deep inside her chest had moved, and she couldn't explain why. He smiled back, awkward but warm. The villagers thought he was new. The elders could not remember the boy who had once been swallowed. Only Mama Uloma squinted at the mud and whispered to the trees. Even the gods can be fooled, if the price is sorrow. But deep beneath the village, in the forgotten root of the swamp, Enma Oli stirs. And she remembers. She always remembers. Adaora no longer remembered the boy with stormy eyes. The mud no longer whispered his name, and the villagers of Idu Ama continued their lives, unaware that a price had been paid in secret. But not all things stay buried. And in the silence beneath the village, Enma Oli stirred and opened her eyes. Enma Oli had watched everything. She had watched Adaora plead. She had watched Ogbanje Miri twist the past. She had watched her servant, Gabriel, reborn without memory or purpose. And she was furious. For centuries Enma Oli had ruled the mud with unspoken laws. Betrayal must be punished. Love in the mud must always end in sorrow. But now her own servant had found a loophole and escaped her grasp. Even worse, he was smiling. Gabriel, though no longer aware of his true name, had found work in Idu Ama. He dug yam ridges, swept shrines, and sang songs the villagers had never heard before. He even spoke gently with Adaora by the water stream, though neither could say why they liked being near each other. But late at night, when the wind moved in circles and the frogs refused to croak, Gabriel would dream. Dreams of drowning, of a woman made of mud, staring at him with eyes like burning stars. Dreams of a voice whispering, "You were mine." And then the sickness began. First, the goats refused to drink. Then the well water turned thick and black. Soon after, children began to fall ill, coughing up mud instead of phlegm. The elders gathered at the square. Drums beat slowly. A chicken was slaughtered. The entrails were spread. And all the signs pointed to one name, Adaora. They dragged her to the prophetess, Mama Uloma, demanding answers. Why is she cursed? But the old woman only looked into Adaora's eyes and said quietly, because she loved, and then forgot. Adaora, confused, could only protest. I don't remember anything, she cried. I have done nothing wrong. But deep inside her chest, something was pounding. A heartbeat that wasn't her own. A memory trying to break through. Mama Uloma turned to the elders and said, if you destroy her, the curse will tighten. If you bury her, the mud will rise to eat us all. There is only one way. She paused. Gabriel must remember. That night, under the light of a crooked moon, Mama Uloma called Gabriel to the sacred grove. There, she laid a gourd filled with memory wine, brewed from the petals of a plant that only grows where the dead have loved. She made him drink. At first, nothing. Then his eyes rolled white. His body trembled. He fell. And in the vision that came, he saw everything. He saw himself walking out of the mud. He saw Adaora, her eyes full of light. He saw their kisses, their laughter, the scream of the earth, the rising of Nama Oli. He saw himself disappear. He saw her bargain. He saw himself reborn. And then he saw Anma Oli again, not in memory, in real time. You cannot run, she said. You belong to me. You loved on cursed soil. Then, let me go, he whispered. Only if she dies. Gabriel woke screaming. Now he knew everything. Adaora, innocent and pure, had sacrificed her memories for his soul. And the price wasn't paid in full, because Nama Oli still wanted blood. He rushed to her hut, breath ragged, cloth soaked in night sweat. She opened the door, and for a moment their eyes met like it was the first time all over again. But this time, he remembered. And when she touched his face and asked, Are you all right? Tears slid down his cheek. You saved me, he said softly. She didn't understand. But her heart beat faster. Something inside her cracked open. A name returned to her lips. Gabriel. The moment the name escaped her tongue, the ground split beneath their feet. The air thickened. The hut trembled. And from the earth, Maoli rose in full form, no longer shaped like sorrow but like rage. Her body towered above the palm trees, her arms swirling with wet clay and ash. Her voice was thunder wrapped in fury. You have broken the pact. She raised one hand, and the mud surged, rising like waves to crush them both. Gabriel turned, held Adaora tightly, and whispered, Let me go. If she takes me, you'll live. Adaora shook her head. No more forgetting. Then came a voice from the shadows. Mama Uloma. She stepped forward, holding an old mirror covered in palm oil and chalk. She lifted it toward Enmaoli and chanted, Spirits of sorrow, you must see yourselves before you judge. Enmaoli froze, for the mirror showed her herself. Not the goddess, not the monster, but the girl she once was. The bride who was left, broken, weeping in mud. The girl who only wanted love. Enmaoli collapsed to her knees. The mud fell silent. She looked at Adaora, her eyes no longer blazing, but full of ancient grief. I wanted to protect the soil from betrayal, she whispered. But I became the betrayal. She reached toward Gabriel with a shaking hand, and then turned to mist. Gone. The ground dried for the first time in centuries. Children laughed. The yams grew even larger. And the village of Idu Ama whispered the tale of love in the mud. A tale of love so strong it defied even the gods. As for Adaora and Gabriel, They married on dry land. But every year, on the day of the harvest moon, they returned to the stream in silence. Not to speak, but to listen to the soft voice in the earth that once tried to keep them apart. Peace had returned to Idu Ama. For the first time in living memory, the ground stayed dry through the rainy season. Children could run without sinking. Mothers no longer cleaned mud off the rafters. Goats danced instead of drowning, and Adaora and Gabriel became the village's favorite story. They married beneath the tall palm trees, their feet planted on soil that no longer wept. They planted yams together. They danced together. And every moon, they lay side by side, their hearts beating a rhythm too deep for even the gods to hear. But some gods do not forget, and the mud always remembers. It began on their first wedding anniversary. Adaora woke with dirt in her mouth. She sat up, gasping, heart thundering in her chest. Her wrapper was soaked, yet the hut was dry. Gabriel lay beside her, eyes twitching in dream, his fists clenched as if he was holding something that wanted to escape. She whispered his name. Gabriel. He opened his eyes, and for a second, they weren't his. That day, the birds didn't sing. That night, the river frogs croaked backward. And deep beneath the earth, something stirred again. Not Enema Oli. Something older. Something that had never left. Ogbanje Miri. You see, the bargain had been made with the shapeshifter, the soul trader, the one who never gives without taking more later. Gabriel had been restored. Adaora had regained her love. But no one had asked, what had Ogbanje Miri taken in return? One day, Gabriel went to the forest to cut bamboo. He did not return. The villagers searched until sunset. They found his machete beside a pool of dark water, but no footprints led away. Adaora searched deeper, guided by the pull in her chest. At the center of the swamp, where no grass grew and birds refused to perch, she found a twisted vine hanging low like a serpent. And beneath it, she saw a reflection. Gabriel, trapped in the water. Mouth open, eyes screaming. She reached in, but the water turned to glass. She struck it. It laughed. Ogbanje Miri's voice echoed all around. 1 year of joy was the debt. You lived it. Now I collect. Adaora shouted back. We gave you everything. You gave me names and memories, but not your legacy. The water shimmered, and Adaora saw something worse. A child, unborn, floating in the current of time. The child she and Gabriel would never have. Ogbanje Miri was stealing not just the past, but their future. Adaora ran, past the shrines, past the yam barns, to the home of Mama Uloma, now bent with age, yet eyes still sharp. The old woman listened, nodded, stirred a pot of herbs with trembling fingers, then whispered, You must return to the place of their first kiss, the cursed Iroko. There lies the truth, and only truth can tear Ogbanja's lies apart. Adaora ran, heart pounding like thunder. She reached the spot. The mud pulsed, no longer angry, but waiting. She stepped into it, and it swallowed her whole. She fell into a world between, a swamp that never ended, waters where stars floated. Voices cried all around, forgotten lovers, broken promises, abandoned dreams. There, at the center, sat Ogbanje Miri. 1,000 faces, all of them hers. And beside it, Gabriel, held in vines of memory. Adaora stepped forward, voice steady. Let him go. The shapeshifter smiled. What will you offer me this time? She placed a hand over her belly. Take my name, take my joy, Take my laughter, but leave us a future. Ogbanje Miri hesitated. No one had ever bargained twice. No one had ever returned to offer hope as currency. The vines shivered. The waters grew still. And then they cracked. Gabriel fell forward, landing in Adaora's arms. He remembered everything. They stood together, facing Ogbanje Miri. And for the first time, they did not beg. They simply loved, openly, with truth, in the heart of the mud. And the swamp broke. Idu Ama felt it. The trees bent toward the village. The streams ran clear. The soil turned warm. And from the broken roots of the Iroko bloomed a new tree. White leaves, gold bark, roots that never sank. Adaora and Gabriel returned home. But they spoke less, smiled more. And every time they looked at each other, it was as if they had just met and known each other forever. Years later, their first child was born during the dry season. A girl. They named her NMA after the one who had once tried to keep them apart. Because even in pain, there is power. And in the mud, there is memory. So, if you ever walk near the swamps of Idu Ama, and the ground feels warm beneath your feet, and a breeze smells like tears and honey, know this: love in the mud is dangerous, but sometimes, just sometimes, it wins.